Well, this was kind of inevitable. Hey guys, Caleb here from CDBS Studios, and when I think animated movies, the first two studios that jump in on my mind is Pixar and Dreamworks. I just feel like that's weird in a lot of ways because it's like those two always, and it's also weird how those two always get lumped together because one of them was founded out of spite for the other. So, after making my Pixar ranking video, I thought it was a pretty good time to go ahead and rank the DreamWorks movies, and seeing as a brand new one just came out, it felt like the right time to finally go ahead and get this video made. So today, I'm going to be taking a stab at ranking all 50 DreamWorks films, from the worst to the best. So let's get it going. At number 50, I have Shrek the Third, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, picking the bottom spot for this list wasn't even close. Shrek the Third is one of the worst animated movies I think I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, I'm not gonna lie, whenever I see people talking about Shrek and I see their criticisms of the movie, most of those criticisms apply to this movie and then some. For some reason, this movie can't pick a footing to save its life, and it makes the pacing, the characters, all feel like they're in the wrong story, and that doesn't feel good. Like, the Shrek franchise in general is really, really good about taking these familiar fairy tale characters and sticking them in stories that they work in. This movie just doesn't know what it wants to be, and that's really, really annoying. And plus, it tries to play on the stuff that worked on Shrek 2 by trying to have the villain basically be the same thing again. We have a lot of the plots are the same. We have weird back and forth between the characters' motivations. I just don't think there's a single thing about Shrek the Third that I like, and I think that's the main reason it has to go in the bottom spot, because I can at least say I like something about every other DreamWorks movie. So, unfortunately, Shrek the Third, you're taking the bottom spot, and I have no regrets for you. At number 49, I have The Boss Baby. This is a really, really weird animated movie, as the premise is that you have this talking baby who is like the business guy. That's already a weird concept, but I can see how it would work, I guess. But then the movie flips this to have this alternate character, Tim, who has this imagination that can basically do anything, and as a result, I think that hurts the movie because you never know what is real and what is supposed to be his imagination. Like, there are multiple times throughout this movie where wacky set pieces are happening where I'm genuinely asking the question, is this real or is this imagination? And I mean, the sequel kind of confirms most of this is supposed to be real, but the fact that a sequel had to confirm that means that this movie didn't know what it wanted to do with its premise. I'm sorry. I will admit there are some good parts. I think all the voice actors are doing an alright job, at least. I think there's some good ideas on display here. I just think there's a lot about this movie that drags it down. Like I mentioned, the premise itself doesn't really do that well. I think the villain is kind of cookie cutter, and there's a lot of other things here and there that kind of bring the movie down. But it's at least has some things I enjoy about it, which is really the only reason it's above Shrek the Third. Like, in reality, these are pretty much the same movie to me. I really don't like either one of these, to be completely honest. At number 48, I have the first DreamWorks movie, Antz. Now, this movie's really weird to talk about because its entire creation steamed around the idea of pushing it out to compete with A Bug's Life. And I know I got a lot of flame for this in my Pixar ranking video. I'm not a huge fan of A Bug's Life. So this movie already was not in my court at all. And when I see most people talking about this movie, usually it stems from the idea that we got Bug's Life and we got Antz. Bug's Life is better, Antz is worse. I mean, that's true. So, because I didn't really like A Bug's Life, you could probably imagine how I feel about this movie. I think there's some good aspects to it, though. I think some of the characters are enjoyable. There's some good jokes here and there. And in general, this movie is actually doing some things that make it look really cool. Unfortunately, I just don't really like this movie a lot. I think the plot they went with is kind of weird. And there's this animation, the animation they use here in general is just really weird and stiff, and I don't really like it. But I will give it this. It is enjoyable. It has some enjoyable moments. And that's kind of why it makes number 48, unlike being last place. At number 47, I have The Boss Baby 2 Family Business. I'm not gonna lie, I like the sequel of The Boss Baby more than I like the original. I think the reason for that is I think the second movie kind of embraced the wackiness they could get out of this premise. While the first movie was trying to stay mostly grounded and trying to kind of be one of those stories that's kind of in the real world, this movie just runs wild with its wacky premise and ends up making a pretty enjoyable story. If you got the Boss Baby and Tim going back in, turning themselves back in time to be kids again so they can go on this mission with Tim's daughter. It's kind of weird, but it's at least enjoyable. I love the brother, the relationship between the Boss Baby and Tim. I think the relationship they do there is pretty fun. I think just the relationship that Tim gets with his daughter is really cool. There's a lot to enjoy about the sequel because, like I said, it just uses the wackiness they can get out of this premise and in a fun way. And also, it's got Jeff Goldblum as the villain, which is just also great. I mean, he's doing a great job. I just think that, like the first Boss Baby, this movie also doesn't really know truly what it wants to be. I think it's better at establishing itself because this movie doesn't have a ton of those weird, wacky imagination sequences, so it's very clearly tell what's real and what's not in this movie. And I think there's a couple scenes here and there that kind of drag on for a little bit and kind of could have been cut for pacing reasons. But as a whole, I actually really liked this movie a lot more than the first Boss Baby, and it does also have those weaknesses, which does bring it down a lot, putting it at number 47 here on our list. At number 46, I have Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. This movie, I didn't check out in theaters when it first came out, because I heard a lot of things about it. I finally got a chance to watch it for this video, and it's honestly the most generic and played out animated movie I think I've ever seen. Most of the time, I think over time, animated movies in general kind of fit into this mold where they have an idea or they have a plot structure that every studio has kind of figured out and they plop the characters into that plot structure and then they just run with that completely straight. And that's kind of what this movie is. Like, to be honest, I predicted the next scene coming up before the movie even got to that next scene. I predicted the ending before I even clicked the play button on the movie when I started. So, yeah, this movie is honestly really, really generic. It's not trying to do anything big or anything special, which I think is kind of the reason why it falls back on a lot of other anime movies, because while all of the other anime movies can fit this mold that we see from can fit that mold that I'm talking about here, it does things to that mold that make it special, puts its own spin on it, and adds little twists that makes the story enjoyable while we go through it. So I think there's enjoyable parts about Ruby Gillman, which is the reason it's not last, but it's definitely generic and played out, which is also why it's not really too much higher on the list. At number 45, I have The Croods. This is another weird animated movie that kind of fits a mold and doesn't really do a lot of things. It's that traditional caveman movie where one of their only jokes they have is that the cavemen invent something that's modern and it doesn't go well for them. So that's kind of annoying that they play that joke a lot. But I think the thing that elevates this movie above some of the other ones we talked about is the voice cast in general. I just think in general the voice cast of this movie is doing pretty well. I mean, you got Ryan Reynolds in there, you got Nicolas Cage, so there's a lot to enjoy about the voice cast in this movie, and I think it's a pretty enjoyable for a most part. It does have some of those cliche, family road trip styles, and you got the end of the apocalypse, you got the apocalypse storyline, so there's some played out parts of this movie, but I think it's at least enjoyable. The characters are likable enough, the voice cast is doing the best they can, and I think there are some decent set pieces the characters do end up going through. So The Croods, as a whole, probably is not the best movie, but it does have certain moments that are really, really good. So I think that's also what elevates it to number 45 on the list. It's just those flaws in general don't really bring it up to the level I expect out of Dreamworks in general. So it kind of is under the midline, I guess we can say. At number 44, we have Home. Now, this movie in general is one that I've had some very conflicting thoughts on because I like this movie, but it also really tries my patience. I think the story in general is a really fun idea as you got these aliens that come down to Earth, and the story is about this outcast alien and this teenage girl trying to find her mom who got taken by the aliens. And it's actually kind of cool. You get to see some fun ideas that play out from the aliens and that. And the movie is really, really good. And it also has this subplot where the aliens sent a message to their sworn enemy, and now they have to stop that message as well. So there's some good ideas that are playing in this movie. I think some of the alien technology is really cool, and there's a lot to enjoy about this movie. And then we get to the Paris sequence, and the Paris sequence is when we finish the alien subplot where we get the message to stop going to their nemesis. But then the movie drops that plot entirely, and it doesn't really know what it wants to be for the last 45 minutes, which is annoying because I think the movie was doing really, really solid. The second the Paris chase happens, I kind of lose all interest in the movie, which is really unfortunate because I really did enjoy that first half. The movie also does have some of that classic played out gross humor. One of the only jokes this movie really has is that the aliens don't know how certain Earth objects work, so the joke comes that they don't know how to use it, which does get kind of old really fast. But there's at least some enjoyable stuff about this movie. The other thing that kind of annoys me is that this movie basically feels like a Rihanna advertisement where they got her to play the main character, and then every 5 minutes they're playing one of the Rihanna song, which does kind of try my patience because it's I don't need to hear every song Rihanna's ever made. Let's move on, please. So yeah, Home is one of those missed potential movies where it has a lot going for it. It has a lot of good things about it. It just has so many bad things that kind of even out it and kind of ends up on the lower side of our list. So, sorry, Home. You had potential. Unfortunately, you did make it kind of low. At number 43, we have Trolls Band Together. Now, I have my feelings about the original Trolls, which we're going to get into very shortly, but Trolls Band Together feels like a movie, again, that has missed potential, as the movie as a whole sets up this fun idea of sibling rivalry where we have Branch trying to reconnect with his brothers after not seeing them for years. And there's some fun ideas they get out of that premise. You get to see how they interact with one another. You get to see some of their tension and kind of how each of them feel differently about one another. There's a lot to enjoy about that idea. And I think as a whole, the movie is really, really good when it deals with Branch and his brothers. But then for some reason, they feel like they need to stick every other character in a sibling relationship. The villains are two siblings. Poppy gets a sister who does nothing, and that's a shame because I really enjoy Camila Cabello, and I think she had a really good presence in the movie. She just even when she is introduced, she's missing from she only gets introduced 75% of the way through the movie, and then in the last 25%, she's in maybe 5% of that. She's not in this movie at all. And then obviously there's the classic problems I have with the Trolls franchise, how the movie basically becomes at some point, let's sing a cover of every pop song that we could get the rights to, and that just gets annoying very fast. I think there's a couple things here and there I don't really like. So as a whole, this is another movie that gets down really far because I think it's another one that has a lot of good potential, and everything they do with Branch and his siblings are really good, but then the rest of the movie has the pop songs, the weird sibling relationships that feels like it needs to stick every character into, that bring it down a lot. So this is where Trolls Band Together lands for me at number 43, which is not bad, but it's not good either, I guess. At number 42, I have the original Trolls, and pretty much a lot of the things I said about Band Together really applies to this movie. This movie has a lot of potential in it. I think the animation looked really cool. The voice actors in general, I really do like. I didn't mention this, but I think Justin Timberlake and Anna Kendrick are doing a pretty good job as the characters, and I do enjoy parts of them. Even the rest of the voice cast is pretty good. I just think that the story itself is also kind of wacky in parts because, like I mentioned, once we start going on the adventure, the movie becomes, let's sing a cover of every pop song that we could get the rights to, which, like I said, gets annoying very fast. And there's also some problems I see with the villains in this movie. I just don't think they're really that interesting or aren't doing really that much for most of the plot. I think there's some weird, wacky hijinks they got to go through for this movie to get a story happens, which is just weird. I think that there's, like I said, a lot to enjoy about the Trolls movies, and it's clear that they're not for me, but I think they're enjoyable enough to where they're not my least favorite Dreamworks movie, but they're definitely not my favorite one. So, Trolls, the original, is just a little higher than Band Together, and it's kind of also on the same level in quality, really. At number 41, I have Trolls World Tour. Weirdly enough, World Tour is my favorite of the Trolls trilogy for the sole reason that it has other music in it. That's the entire reason I have it above the other two. Like, I'm gonna be completely honest. Trolls World Tour is basically not doing anything special. The plot is basically Infinity War. We have one character who has to collect 6 other things from different places around the universe. They get all the things, they do things with those items, and then the movie's over. And this movie also tries to have this fun plot about revisionist history and kind of getting along with different societies. It pays homage to these ideas, but it doesn't ever go anywhere with them. And I'm not gonna lie, the voice cast again is doing the best they can. They just don't really have a lot to work with. And once again, this movie becomes pretty quickly, how many covers of pop songs can we sing because we got the rights to all of them? The only reason that this movie is above the other two for me is because it has rock songs in it. And I am more of a rock song guy than I am a pop guy. So that's the only reason I have it above the other two, is because it has songs I like now. Like, I'm not gonna lie, if you've noticed, I put the 3 Trolls movies basically right next to each other because my thoughts on them are the exact same. They're not the movies for me. And I think in general, they have so much potential sometimes and then also lose it really, really quickly. And like I said, each Trolls movie is maybe like a smidge higher than the other for various different reasons. So, Trolls World Tour lands right here. Let's move on from the Trolls movies and let's move into the other DreamWorks stuff. At number 40, I have Shark Tale. Now, for me personally, Shark Tale kind of falls into the same category as Cars 2. If you remember from my Pixar video, I neglected to put Cars 2 last for the sole reason that I enjoy the movie more than the other ones I put below it, even though it probably is a worse movie than them. Shark Tale kind of falls into that same category where I feel like simultaneously it is such a cinematic disaster that it probably deserves to be that bottom spot. But like Cars 2, I am never bored watching Shark Tale. Shark Tale is just such a fun movie. The voice cast is doing amazing. This whole fish world they've created looks really cool. In fact, the whole Mafia movie parody they're doing is actually pretty funny at times and actually is a pretty fun movie. That's realistically why it's not last place for me, is because while it might be worse than the other movies we've talked about on the list, I simultaneously can't put Shark Tale last because it is a joy to watch, and I would probably sit through another viewing of Shark Tale before I ever turn on the Trolls movies or Shrek the Third or the Boss Baby duology. I will sit through another watch through of Shark Tale before I turn on any of those movies, and that's saying something. So that's kind of where Shark Tale falls, right where it is. I really don't have much more to say that hasn't already been said, so I'm gonna keep going. And just know Shark Tale is actually a pretty good movie, and if you can look past all its faults, I'd recommend go watch it because it actually is really, really good. For kind of the same reasons, at number 39, I have Turbo. Now, I know this is probably the weirdest placement out of all of them. Turbo has been berated on the internet as being one of the worst animated movies of all time, and for me personally, it kind of has the Cars 2 problem, where, yes, I understand it's bad, I know it's bad, but I simultaneously can't put it last because Turbo is one of the few movies out of DreamWorks that I really enjoy watching. Like, it also probably comes down to the fact that I am one of the few people that goes to the Indy 500 every year, so I like seeing the Indy 500 represented in film. That's just fun for me. And like there's some other parts, like Ryan Reynolds is one of my favorite celebrities in Hollywood, so having his voice in this movie is honestly pretty fun. But there's also a lot of the downsides of this movie, mainly the villain. Like, it's obviously not a shock. It's the racer that Turbo idolized his whole life, and that's the villain. Makes sense. But the movie also doesn't know how to do him because he wants him to be a twist villain where he reveals himself to be kind of this bad guy. But the thing that's weird is that the way he acts after he's revealed is straight up a bad guy, which is never the way he acted before. Like, you'll notice that in the movie, there's the twist reveal scene where he reveals to Turbo and only Turbo that he's the villain. But then for the rest of the movie, he's acting like a complete jerk in a way he never did in the first half. And keep in mind, during that last half, it's during the race when he's in front of the entire viewing world. Like, that just is baffling to me. Like, that's not how you write a twist villain. And then there's also the side snails that are all voiced by celebrities. So it's like really weird, like, that we have just like Turbo doing his thing, and then for some reason we got to cut back every second to like Snoop Dogg and Samuel L. Jackson giving some random joke. So that honestly is kind of jarring. I just think Turbo itself, only reason it wins for me is because I like watching it compared to some of these other movies, but I realistically can't put it any higher because I understand its faults. So, there you go. At number 38, I have Joseph, King of Dreams. Now, this movie is, for me, is what I thought The Prince of Egypt was going to be. When I think DreamWorks making a movie about a story from the Bible, I think tons of overpaid celebrities, not that great animation, pop songs, and weird jokes coming out of nowhere. Unfortunately, DreamWorks didn't make that movie, and they made a masterpiece called The Prince of Egypt, which we're going to talk about later. But Joseph King of Dreams is the exact movie I just described. It is honestly one of the worst excuses for a animated movie, and honestly, I hated almost every second of it. I will give DreamWorks this, though, as a good point. They made this direct-to-DVD sequel, and they made one. It was bad, so they never made another one. Thank you for saving my sanity, DreamWorks, unlike Disney. But yeah, as a whole, Joseph King of Dreams is just not that great of a movie, and coming off The Prince of Egypt, this is such a huge letdown. I wanted to love this movie, but I just couldn't bring myself to. It does have some good aspects, and in a lot of ways, it is at least a good movie, which is really the only reason it's made it this far on the list. But as it stands, this is a decent enough movie. It's perfectly surpassable, and yeah, I just don't really have much more to say about it. So let's move on before I say anything else that's going to get me canceled. At number 37, I have Abominable. Now, this is another movie that I feel like has such missed potential. Like, I'm going to be honest, the first 20 minutes or so of this movie is actually really, really good as we're living in this alternate city in a different part of the world. That's always fun to see in animated movies because I feel like so many animated movies take place in America. Like, it's fun to see alternate cultures, and we have our main character bonding with the Yeti, and we get to see all this fun stuff. They hop on the boat to go on the adventure, and that's kind of where the movie loses itself. I think the adventure itself is kind of what brings the movie down, mainly because of the fact that when we get on the adventure, they introduce this idea that the Yeti has these superpowers that can basically do anything. There is like no limit to his superpowers, and they do whatever the plot demands it so that they can escape whatever situation they're in. Which just gets really predictable because then later in the movie, whenever they're in a tough situation, I'm just like, why don't you just bring back the giant grass wave or the giant dandelion flower? Like, why do we need, like, it just doesn't feel like this movie knew what it wanted its Yeti's powers to be. So it just gave it whatever and said, oh, we're in a situation. Just do this cool bit of animation to get out of it, which I'll admit, the movie looks good. I just don't really think it does great with the Yeti powers. And then the other part of that is that this movie doesn't really have a handle on its villains very well. Like, this movie spends, like, the first, like, half of it where the villain is this billionaire guy who captured the Yeti initially, and he has, like, this whole arc where he's, like, kind of mean to basically every animal he goes through. And then the twist happens where it's revealed it's his head scientist who wants to capture the Yeti and kill it. And suddenly the movie flips, and all of a sudden she's acting like this huge jerk to every character in the movie, and the billionaire guy is like the sweetest guy character probably in the story. Like, they switched personalities for some reason, and it just is so jarring because it's like, why did you already had one villain? Why did you take his personality and give it to a random other character? Like, what? So, yeah, Abominable has its problems, but at least its animation and its first 20 minutes are really, really good, which does elevate it to number 37th place. Wow, crazy how, like, the first 20 minutes of an entire movie can just elevate it above an entire other movie. That is just honestly kind of insane to me. Like, I'm not even scripted right now, but wow, I never realized how crazy that sounds. At number 36, I have Monsters vs. Aliens. Now, this movie is a really weird one to rank because I simultaneously feel like it's underrated and overhated. Like, this is not the worst animated movie to ever come out of DreamWorks. I think there's a lot of enjoyable elements to it. Mainly, you got Dwight Schrute as the villain, who is really fun. You've got, some of the fun monsters, like I enjoy Will Arnett as the missing link, and I think Susan as the self is pretty decent of a character. But this movie kind of markets itself to trying to be this fun premise of monsters, a monster movie plus alien invasion, which is really cool. But then when you watch the movie, it is basically just a monster movie for kids that happens to involve aliens. So I think this movie is good. It has its moments. Some jokes are really good. I think some of the characters are really enjoyable, like I mentioned. And I think the story in general is really fun. It just has those downsides where I think the other characters are not the best. I think there's some out of place jokes here and there. And honestly, the third act climax I wish went on a little longer. It kind of is a little short. So, as a whole, Monster vs. Aliens, really decent movie. Has a lot to enjoy about it. But I don't think it's the greatest thing to ever come out of DreamWorks, which is kind of why it ends kind of in the middle of our list. At number 35, I have The Croods: A New Age. Yeah, I actually enjoyed the first Croods movie, the second Croods movie. That is kind of shocking to me. Pretty much everything I praised about the first Croods movie is still present here. The voice cast is still doing really, really fun. Good job. I think the animation here honestly looks better as it's kind of ditching that kind of realistic style the first movie was going for and kind of giving us this fantastic alternate world, which is really fun to look at. The characters are all still really likable. I think they made some of the ones I didn't like in the first movie really enjoyable, and they add a bunch of new characters who add to the story pretty nicely. I just think there's some weird things. This movie has one of those plot lines that's really funky where they basically, after a certain number of time, they split up all our characters into like different subplots, and then they all come back together for the climax, which can be kind of weird, especially when like you enjoy certain plot lines more than others. And I think also some of the new characters they introduce are kind of feel unnecessary, and it almost feels like a checkbox to basically be like, we need to expand the world so the sequel doesn't feel unnecessary. So I think The Croods: New Age is a really decent film. It brings over the stuff I liked from the first movie while still having a couple of its issues. So it's a really, really good middle-of-the-road movie because I don't think I hated it or disliked it as much as the first movie, which is kind of why it makes it this high. So thank you, The Croods, that we got a good movie out of your franchise. That's better than I can say for Trolls or Boss Baby. Yay. At number 34, I have Kung Fu Panda 4. Now, this movie is unnecessary, I'm not gonna lie. The original Kung Fu Panda trilogy is just so good, and we're gonna get into those movies at some point, but the fourth movie is already unnecessary, but I had hopes for it going in. There were some fun ideas present in the trailer. There was a lot of ideas, Po kind of turning into a sensei character seems kind of fun, and we got the new character who is pretty interesting, and some other decent things coming here. We were getting Tai Lung back, like that seemed awesome. But when you see the movie, it's not the greatest. I mean, I get what they're going for with all the plots and stuff, but like, I don't know. Awkwafina, like usual, is kind of annoying as her character, and I think the villain in general is just not that great. Chameleon is one of, I guess, the least interesting Dreamworks villains, and also it brings back these villains from the original just to have them sit in cages for the story. Like, Tai Lung is maybe in this movie for like 5 minutes, which also, that's the other thing that kind of makes me mad is they haven't seen at the ending of this movie where the villains all kind of come and bow to Po and be like, oh yeah, we respect you. Two of those characters are Shen and Kai, two characters that tried to kill you. Like, Shen committed mass genocide on your entire race. Like, and he respects you? Like, excuse me? I don't know. Kung Fu Panda 4 is definitely not the worst movie that came out last year, but it's definitely not one of the best. I definitely wanted more out of a Kung Fu Panda movie. In fact, the other Kung Fu Pandas in general, I just get more out of. So it's not the greatest thing, but it's at least enjoyable for the most part. I think taking out of account the villain and the kind of weird subplots here and there, it is a really interesting movie. Pretty much everything Po is doing in this movie is still funny. Jack Black still embodies the character well. So it's a decent movie. It has its problems, which is kind of why it ended up right in the middle of the list, because I like certain aspects of it. I dislike other aspects, so everything kind of evens out to put it right here on the list. At number 33, I have Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas. Now, this movie is really interesting as being the last 2D animated movie that DreamWorks made. It has a lot going for it. You got some great characters, a fun high-sailing adventure, some pretty stunning animation, and it's a really, really solid movie. Where things start to fall apart is the story itself. I think the story is that classic, we have a MacGuffin that we have to go collect, and when we get to the MacGuffin, we find we didn't need it all along, and we can solve the movie's problem without it, which is just kind of lazy writing, but it's fine. Also, the villain is just not that intense. Like, I think she has her moments, but she kind of is absent from a lot of the movie where, like, most villains would like maybe try to hinder the hero's experience, try to make their adventure harder. She kind of is absent for most of the adventure, which is just kind of annoying. I think there's some decent moments here and there. Overall, this is another movie that I think is really, really good, but the negative aspects kind of even it out to where it kind of becomes a middle of the road movie. So that's kind of where we're sitting with Sinbad. I still would recommend watching it though, because it's not terrible, but it's definitely not the greatest thing out there. It does look pretty though. I'll give it that. At number 32, I have Puss in Boots. Now, this is another very interesting movie for me. I've mentioned before that the Shrek movies are pretty good at taking the characters they have, these familiar fairy tale characters, and putting them in stories they work in. Puss in Boots is kind of this fun Indiana Jones inspired adventure, but it kind of isn't. It has a lot of side plots involving, Kitty and Humpty Dumpty, and they're kind of weird. In fact, because of those subplots, and also it spends way too much time on Puss and Humpty's backstory, the adventure kind of doesn't start for a long time, and it kind of ends before it really starts to get any interesting. The villains aren't that great. I just don't think Jack and Jill are very interesting villain characters. And as a whole, the movie just kind of isn't that great in a lot of places. I still think it's fun though. It has its moments. It's not the worst movie I've ever experienced, but it definitely, coming from the Shrek franchise and also knowing what later happened to Puss in Boots, I kind of expect more from this movie. So kind of ends up right here in the middle of the list because I really just think it has good elements and bad elements that kind of even each other out. At number 31, I have How to Train Your Dragon 2. Whoa, put down the pitchforks. I still think this is a really good movie. The How to Train Your Dragon series in general is a really good film franchise that I think almost every movie is really good in its own way. This is just the weakest of the movies for me. I think this movie kind of is trying to juggle too much, where we have the Hiccup going to become chief plotline that ends up with his dad's dying, which kind of doesn't feels like an afterthought. There's the relationship drama between him and Astrid. The side characters kind of get nothing to do. His mom comes back and has been like studying dragons, and it's just like a weird plot point in this movie. The villain is just not that interesting. I think he's saying the least out of the movie. In fact, himself, he's not even in a majority of the movie. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is one of those movies that I find still frustrating because considering the other movies in the franchise, this franchise has a chance to be really good and have really good movies. This movie I just don't feel like matches that same quality level, which is why it doesn't really work for me and kind of isn't the best movie ever like a lot of people say it is. I still think it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's not the worst thing I've ever experienced, but it's definitely not the best, which is kind of why it ends up right here at 31. At number 30, I have Spirit Untamed. Now, I am completely aware of the fact that this movie was not intended for me to watch. It is that classic, teenage girl kind of movie that you get Spirit and the teenage girl meet, they do things together, there's a villain who shows up trying to take Spirit, the kids fight to save Spirit, and the movie kind of ends. It's a very simplistic kind of story, and I think that's also why I have it directly in the center of the list, because it kind of is that movie where you know exactly what you're getting going in. It doesn't really subvert your expectations, but also the expectations you have are also kind of less predictable. Like I mentioned, the reason I don't like Ruby Gillman is because it's predictable. This movie, while being predictable, it has enjoyable moments that actually make it feel like it has those things that are part of it. That doesn't make it feel like they followed the formula just because they didn't have any ideas. They followed the formula, but then added some stuff to make it look and feel good. So there's a lot to enjoy about Spirited Untamed. I get it's not a movie intended for me. I enjoyed it nonetheless, and it's like the middle. It's like literally what I call the perfect midline DreamWorks movie, which is why it's at number 30. So that's kind of what I feel about Spirited. Let's move on, and because I really just don't have much else to say about this movie. I'm going to get so much hate for this. At number 29, I have B-Movie. Now, this movie probably deserves the title of worst DreamWorks movie. I mean, considering the other movies I ranked below it, it is probably a worse movie, but very similar to other movies I've mentioned, I cannot put B-Movie any lower than I have because it is simply a joy to watch. Now, this movie has probably the most insane premise I've ever seen for an animated movie, where you have a bee who wants to leave the hive because he doesn't want to work as a honey at this honey factory for the rest of his life. He falls in love with a human girl and then makes a plan to sue the human race for stealing their honey. And it becomes a courtroom drama for the rest of it. Like, that is the most insane premise I've ever seen in an animated movie. But this movie just runs with it. And honestly, I think the movie itself knows it's stupid, because every single voice actor they got for this movie is literally just, half of them are pointing out how bad this idea is. Like, literally, Patrick Warburton's character is literally just calling out why this movie is the dumbest and most insane thing of all time. And I think that's kind of why I enjoy it. I think everyone involved with this movie was having a good time, and it makes for one of the most funny experiences I've ever gone through, because everything in the courtroom is just hilariously done, and the movie is really, really funny for its first half. Unfortunately, where it goes down for me is the second half, because once we finish up with the courtroom drama, we spend the last 30 minutes of the movie doing an environmental message on why bees are important, which is important for kids to learn. But I think it kind of drags the movie down, because it's been nothing but crazy stuff, hijinks happening for like the entire movie. And then we get to the back 30 minutes where suddenly it's now a very serious, the movie wants to take itself seriously. And I just think that's kind of comes out of nowhere, and it kind of just makes the movie a little less funny and a little less enjoyable for me. So unfortunately, Boo Movie does kind of fall off in its back half, but that first half is just so strong, which is honestly why it's made it as high as it is. And that's really all I have to say about Boo Movie. I'm sorry if you think it's the worst DreamWorks movie. I cannot put it last, because it is simply one of the most enjoyable animated movies I think I've ever had the pleasure of sitting through. At number 28, I have Orion and the Dark. Now, this is another very interesting animated movie where I simultaneously feel like it's really predictable, and it's also really good. I think it's one of the anime movies I've seen where it does actually have a really interesting premise, and it uses that premise to its fullest. It's got a lot of fun ideas in it, and the characters in general are just really, really enjoyable. There's a lot to really love about Orion and the Dark, but unfortunately, it's also really, really predictable. I think that there's a lot about it where I was really kind of being like, oh, this is going to happen next. Okay, this is going to happen next. But there are a couple times where the movie did stump me, and it did actually allow for some fun experience. But as it goes, this is a pretty average animated movie. It's not really doing anything special. It's not really doing anything bad, which is kind of why it ends up near the middle of the list, because I just don't think it's amazing, but I also don't think it's terrible. So that's kind of where we are with this movie. I really don't have much to say about this movie. I really didn't have any notes while I was watching it. So it's decent, it's fun, but it's definitely not the greatest movie DreamWorks has ever created. So let's go ahead and move on. At number 27, I have Madagascar. Now, this is another very kind of average movie. I think all the characters are likable, the comedy is pretty decent, and the story itself is pretty good. But in reality, and I think almost everybody knows this, and it's probably not a shock, the best thing about this movie is the penguins. Everything involving the penguins is like top tier amazing, and everything involving the zoo animals kind of falls off. Like, that's just kind of how the movie goes. And unfortunately, the penguins are very, very small in this movie, because it was during the time when DreamWorks didn't think that the penguins were even going to be hits. Like, they were voiced by directors. Like, that nobody knew that the penguins are going to be as popular as they were, and they were. They're literally the best part of this movie, and it just kind of goes that way. Apart from that, I think there's also some other decent things to enjoy about the other animals. I think some of the stories they do is really fun, and I think the comedy is pretty decent, although a lot of it does hinge on pop culture references. This is my least favorite Madagascar film. I still think it's fine. It's definitely not terrible, but it's definitely not great. So it kind of ends up right where I have it. So, but the penguins itself do elevate this movie very high, so that's also why it's made it up to 27. So at number 26, I have Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted. Now, my feelings on this movie are very, very similar to the first movie, where pretty much I think the movie's fine. It's got a lot to enjoy about it. The penguins are obviously the peak of the movie. Everything with the penguins is done great. And there actually are some decent sequences in this movie. Like, I really do enjoy some of the circus stuff, like the circus show and the ending sequence where they save them at the zoo. There's a lot to enjoy about this movie. I think where the movie kind of flops is I think it sets itself up, it hits its peak way too early. Like the Monte Carlo chase at the very start of the movie is so good that it promises so much better. I think the movie peaks within that Monte Carlo chase, and then all of a sudden it flops, and we're kind of doing random misadventures until we get to the ending where we do the circus show and that, where we actually get to see that action return from the opening. So I just feel like that's a really big problem with Madagascar 3. Like, it does so good in the first like 30 minutes or so, and the second we get past Monte Carlo, I really check out of the movie until we get to the ending with the circus show. It has that classic lie reveal plot, which is not great, and obviously some of the animals kind of don't have a lot to do. Like, there's a couple of them in this movie that feel like they're just there because they have to be there because they're just part of the franchise. So, Madagascar 3, it's kind of very similar in quality for me to the first movie. I just think this one is a little bit better because I think some of the aspects of the third one are better than the first one is. So, that's really the only reason it's really beat the first one for me. It's still a decent movie. It's not the best, but it's not the total worst. So, it kind of ends up right here. At number 25, I have Madagascar 2, Escape to Africa. This is my favorite of the mainline Madagascar movies, and at the same time, I still feel like it's very similar in quality to the other two. Like, this movie is kind of has the exact same issues. The penguin stuff is peak. Pretty much everything that involves the penguins is really good, and probably the best part of the movie. Everything else kind of blows, not gonna lie, because this movie also did a really weird thing where the second we get to Africa, it splits off all of our main characters into separate side plots and then brings them back together for the climax. So we have Alex's plotline, which is basically just a watered down version of the Lion King for some reason. Marty has this plotline that really doesn't go anywhere and only really exists to split Marty and Alex up for the movie. Melman and Gloria actually have a pretty decent plot of their love relationship and Melman thinking he's dying, which is kind of cool. And then Julian's off being a king, doing weird hijinks. This movie as a whole, I think, kind of is very similar in quality to the other three Madagascar films. I still think it's pretty average, though. I think the movie peaks, obviously, with the penguins, and I think some of the aspects of the Alex plotline are done really well, but in reality, it's just The Lion King, but with a less interesting Scar and a less interesting story in general. So I think it's clearly my favorite of the Madagascar movies, but I don't think it's also a peak movie. Like, very similar to how I feel about Trolls, how I feel like all three of them are very close in quality. I feel the same way about the Madagascar films. So they kind of end up right next to each other at the center of the list. I personally just prefer the second one because I think I enjoy more about the second one on rewatches than I do 1 and 3. So that's really all I have to say about the Madagascars. Let's move on. At number 24, I have Kung Fu Panda 3. This is clearly my least favorite of the Kung Fu Panda trilogy, but I still think it's actually got some things to offer. First off, the villain. I think J.K. Simmons is doing an amazing job as Kai. I think for the kind of villain he is, he's a very menacing presence, and whenever he shows up, you know things are about to go bad for the heroes, which is pretty cool in a villain. And also his theme in general is just really interesting. But on the flip side, this movie meanders for so long. We're spending all this time in the panda village, kind of doing random panda training, just for it to be revealed that obviously Poe's dad doesn't know the chi technique, and it kind of makes the whole movie feel irrelevant because we've been spending hijinks in this village doing nothing, pretty much. But I think there are still some enjoyable stuff in that back half, though. That back half where we have Poe kind of teaching all the pandas kung fu. We have the resolution between the two dads. You got the stuff with Tigress in there. There's a lot to enjoy about the back half of this movie. But unfortunately, the back half is where the movie peaks. And it kind of meanders for so longer in the middle that honestly, for parts of the middle of this movie, I'm kind of checking out and I'm kind of getting really bored. And then the second the Jade Palace gets destroyed is when I check back in and I suddenly start to enjoy the movie really well. So that's just kind of how I feel about this movie. It's definitely the worst of the trilogy, but it's definitely not a bad movie. There's the fight sequences are in there, which are really good. Kung Fu Panda 3 is a solid movie. It's just not on the same level of quality as the first two movies, which is honestly why it's as low as it is. But it's still a decent movie, and honestly, I thought it was going to become even worse when the Kung Fu Panda 4 came out, but honestly, it doesn't really change the impact that this movie had. So, thank you Kung Fu Panda 3, I guess, for not being devalued by a future sequel. Yay. At number 23, I have Shrek Forever After. Now, This movie's quality is so much higher than the Shrek the Third that honestly makes me feel like this is just the trilogy for me. I'm just gonna skip Shrek the Third every time I rewatch the Shrek series. As it goes for this movie in particular, it has that very classic, It's a Wonderful Life story where you have the main character ends up in some reality where they don't exist anymore, and it's kind of this mortality tale of how they don't really realize how good how good their life is until they don't have it anymore. It's a very interesting story. You kind of get to see all the different ways Shrek interacted with all these different characters, and it's really fun to get to see the reconnection of the love story from the first movie with Fiona, which is a lot of fun. And Rumpelstiltskin is also really, really cool as the villain. I think he's got a lot of smugness to him, and his plan is actually pretty cool. I love how he's this character who has to manipulate people to get what he wants, and he can't just do it. I love characters that are like that, where they're like these wishing characters, and they have to twist your words in order to get what they want. It's a really fun kind of villain. There's a lot to enjoy about Shrek Forever After. I just think there's certain aspects of it that I don't really like. Personally, I just don't like Puss in Boots in this movie. I just think they wanted to do they wanted to keep up that metaphor of how Shrek really impacted everybody else in the story and do that. Puss just kind of feels like he's just added on, like he's just this fat cat now, and that Fiona has. Doesn't feel like that goes anywhere, and almost just feels like it's meant to be there to enhance its story. There are certain aspects, like I think this movie meanders for a little bit in the middle when Shrek first figures out that he's in an alternate world, and it's kind of he doesn't know what to do. There's a little bit of that comes out of nowhere. I think some of the stuff near the middle of the movie just kind of drags and doesn't really feel like we're having any momentum in the plot. There's a lot of stuff I don't like about Shrek Forever, but it's still a really, really good movie. I enjoy pretty much most of the mainline Shrek movies, so this movie still makes it pretty high on the list. And I really don't have much more to say, so let's move on with the list, and yeah. At number 22, I have Over the Hedge. This is another very interesting animated movie that has a pretty wacky premise that the movie runs with and actually makes a really good story with. It does have a plethora of overpaid celebrities in it, which I thought I was going to hate, but most of them are actually doing a pretty decent job with their voice acting. I don't think I hated any of the voice actors in this movie, which is rare when the movie is basically 75% celebrities. I really enjoy the villain in this movie. The Verminator is a really cool villain, and I think there's a lot to enjoy about him and how he's kind of one of those villains that always screws up, but that's kind of the joke, and that's why it's funny. There's some weird, wacky sequences in this movie. The emotional heart is in this movie. I really like Over the Hedge. There's a lot I really, really enjoy about it. I just think it's saying the least out of a lot of the old DreamWorks movies. So I don't really think it makes it too high, because I think it's a good children's movie. It doesn't have that emotionally deep layers that I like in some of the best DreamWorks movies, so it doesn't make it too much higher. But Over the Hedge is still a really, really solid movie, and if you have not ever had the chance to see it, I would totally recommend it, because it is honestly one of the few movies on the same level as like Shark Tale and B-Movie, where I would totally rewatch this movie, even though it probably is not the best movie to ever exist. I just can't lie. These movies are enjoyable, and I think that's honestly why I have them ranked higher than they probably should be, because I've said this before, I prefer a movie that I enjoy watching rather than a movie where I'm bored out of my mind for 75% of the runtime. At number 21, I have The Road to El Dorado. This is another movie that I remembered very much from my childhood, and it still holds up really, really well. This movie is gorgeous on the animation level. It has this really fun idea of mixing these 2D characters with this 3D background, and it just makes the animation look stunning. This movie is really, really good. And there's a ton of really good stuff. The characters in general are really fun. I thought I was going to dislike this plot of these two con artists kind of making this whole town make them think they're God so they can take their money and stuff. And I thought it was going to be that classic liar reveal plot that doesn't really go anywhere and kind of just is really boring. But I really enjoyed the scene because they actually reveal pretty early on in the movie that the chief knows that they're lying, and he's just happy that they're good men and that they're giving their village hope. I really like that, and it's also really subtle as well, which is really fun when you rewatch and you're like, oh, he knows. So that's fun. Some of the things that bring this movie down, I think the villain is just not that interesting. I think he's one of the least interesting parts of the movie. And also, this movie, for some reason, has its third act climax way earlier than it should. Like, it has its third act climax, like, maybe 20 minutes before the credits start rolling. So, it feels like for the last 20 minutes, we're kind of meandering, doing random things. And honestly, when I was watching the movie, I was like, wait, shouldn't we have ended by now? So that's kind of some of the things I don't like about this movie, but the first, like, solid 2 acts of this movie are really, really good, and it really elevates this movie really, really high. And even that third act, even though it's a little clunky, does still have some good aspects of it. So that's what I think about Road to El Dorado, and you should totally go watch it. It is great. Bringing us into the top 20, I have Flushed Away. This was another movie I was really shocked that I enjoyed. Like, the Hugh Jackman, Kate Winslet rat movie is actually pretty decent. The love story is obviously predictable. You got some parts of it where it's like, oh, they don't like each other, but they're going to by the end of the movie, and it's so obvious, which kind of brings the movie down to some rights. There's some aspects of the villain I don't really enjoy, but I think there's enough to enjoy about his henchman in that, which does make him a little more enjoyable. I also really enjoyed how this movie portrays its secret world. I mean, lots of these movies like Toy Story, Shark Tale, and Wreck-It Ralph, for instance, they all create this hidden world that we get to explore, and the rat world is actually pretty cool. I love how it's this buildup of almost all of these discarded items, which is really cool. There are some aspects of the movie that I think I also don't really like. I think these, like, baby slug things are kind of way too or trying to be marketable to little kids like the Minions are, which I just don't think are that interesting. The animation on the humans when they're in the movie is really bad, but thankfully that's only like the first 30 seconds, then like the last 30 seconds. So it's not terrible, but they just look not that great. And it kind of made me also shocked when I saw them in the first 30 seconds of the movie. I was like, oh no, oh no. But if you can get past those couple of items, this is still a really strong movie. The love story makes sense. The characters are all enjoyable. The secret world is fun. Generally, Flushed Away is one of the better DreamWorks movies. Sorry. One of the better DreamWorks movies. And honestly, it is totally worth a watch if you can find it. At number 19, I have Chicken Run. This is one of my favorite animated movies of all time. I really, really enjoy it. I remember watching it as a child. I love the stop motion animation in the movie. The characters are all enjoyable. The villain is really cool. Mrs. Tweety is really kind of unhinged, and that's kind of why I like her. And this whole idea of this whole premise of these chickens trying to break out of this, like, chicken coop that's kind of become a prison is actually kind of interesting and a lot of fun. And I really enjoy this movie. The story is kind of where this movie falls apart for me. I think, in general, the story kind of didn't know what it wanted to be, and it kind of feels like we're flip-flopping between multiple plot lines. At first, the movie is about this idea of this rooster crash lands in the prison, and he can fly, so he's going to teach the chickens to fly to get out, which obviously that's dumb, and most people should know that, but I mean, it's the plot of the movie, so maybe it will happen. And then it's a lie reveal plot line about how the rooster can't fly, he just uses a cannon from the circus, so he leaves, and then the movie switches into we're going to be building a plane out of the chicken coops to fly out. Now, wait a second. When we get to that back half, I really like that idea. Like, honestly, I wish the whole movie was just about them building the plane, and maybe they could still have that stuff they do around the thing where they're hiding it from Mrs. Tweety. They could have the whole chicken pot pie plot line, which is honestly really interesting. There's a lot. I wish the back half of this movie could have just been the whole movie, because I think the plane stuff is way more interesting than the flight lessons. So that's kind of my feelings on Chicken Run. I think it's really, really enjoyable. That story is where it falls apart. So if the story was on point, this easily would have shot this movie into the top 5 for me, because it is just so, so good. And even though it's low on the list, I probably still will rewatch this movie more than anything else on this list, because I just really enjoy this movie, and it's one of my family's cult classics. So there you have it. At number 18, I have Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. This is another very weird one that I was shocked I actually enjoyed. I actually read the Captain Underpants books as a kid, so I was really happy when this movie was getting made. And I really liked it, and this movie has a lot of things to enjoy about it. One thing I like is, usually I've mentioned before in the past that going into animated movies and watching them, I don't like that typical child humor of the poop and pee jokes, the fart humor. It gets old really quickly, especially when many movies reuse the same jokes. It works in this movie, surprisingly, because it's integral to the actual books. And it also feels like the creators of this movie really put a lot of thought into it because there's so many references in this movie to the book. Like, they even have the everything except fabric softener store in there, which is such a weird detail to put in the background of like 3-second shot just for fans of the book. Like I mentioned though with Chicken Run, where this movie really falls apart for me is the story. It kind of speed runs through a couple things because it has to do the origin story where Mr. Krupp gets hypnotized and turns into Captain Underpants, and then really quickly we switch into the Professor Poopy Pants stuff, which just really feels like out of place. And then the end of the movie goes back to the origin story stuff where they destroy the ring, but it doesn't fix the problem. And then it switches into the talking toilet stuff. So this movie's story feels like it was trying to do too much. It wanted to be the origin story, include Professor Poopy Pants, and then set up the talking toilet so if they ever wanted to make a sequel, they could. Yeah, this movie's story is really the big thing dragging it down. I think if it was a little more consistent, maybe it could have been a lot better. But this movie has so many things I love about it that I have to put it so high because it's probably one of the most enjoyable Dreamworks films I've ever watched. I mean, they even included the Flip-O-Rama in this movie. That's how dedicated they were for telling these books correctly. At number 17, I have The Bad Guys. Now, I really enjoyed The Bad Guys when it first came out, much to my shock. This movie was kind of right up my alley. I like heist movies. I didn't think that the animation looked that bad. It actually looked really good considering what everybody was saying. And honestly, the voice cast is doing a really, really good job. I was a little skeptical of some of the casting choices, but they kind of won me over in the end. And even the story was actually kind of good, having this kind of having the bad guys trying to pretend to go good so they can steal something because they messed up a job, and then they have this whole plot, and then eventually they have to return this stuff at the end because they become good. I think this movie does kind of fall flat. I think the villain is just kind of interesting. They try to do this big twist reveal where it's, the real villain was the guy that was training them to be good, which is kind of predictable, not gonna lie, and some of his plans feel like he took really big leaps in logic to make it work. But whatever, it's still a fun, good movie. I really liked it, and honestly, the sequel looks pretty good, so I'm probably gonna end up checking that out when it comes out. So, congratulations, Dreamworks, you found a new franchise that actually is kind of good. At number 16, I have our newest Dreamworks movie, Dogman. And very similar to how I felt about Captain Underpants, this movie was really, really good because I think it was integral to the original books. Now, I did not read Dogman as much as I read Captain Underpants as a kid, but from what I knew about Dogman going into this movie, there was a lot about Dogman that really paralleled the books really well. And in fact, this movie felt more like a retelling of the books than Captain Underpants did. So I think that's why I liked it a little bit more than Captain Underpants. And like I said, there's tons of the background details. The cast is all enjoyable. This is a really shocking surprise of an animated movie. And honestly, with this, The Bad Guys, and some of the other recent Dreamworks movies, I feel like Dreamworks is really starting to take a new direction into some really good animated movies that make me really hope that we're moving away from the days of things like The Boss Baby and Trolls to start telling some really, really good stories using some really good franchises that are actually have good things about them. So, Dogman, really, really good movie. If you can find a way to watch it in the theaters or you're waiting for streaming, totally check this movie out because it is so, so worth it. At number 15, I have How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World. This is the finale to the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. It's got a lot to enjoy about it, and I really love this movie. Now, I know a lot of people over the years have called this out being one of the worst How to Train Your Dragon movies. Well, I say Boulder Dash. This movie is really, really good, and I love so much about it. All the stuff they do with the Hiccup trying to grapple with this idea of keeping the dragons around or letting them go is a lot of fun. I love his relationship with Astrid. I think the relationship he has with his mom in this movie, how he's kind of turning to her now that his dad is gone. And there's a lot to enjoy about this movie. There's also a lot I dislike, which is really why it's not that higher. I think a lot of the side characters just have nothing to do in this movie. Again, they've kind of been sidelined hard since the first movie and kind of they don't have a lot to do. I think the villain is kind of uninteresting. And I hate to say this, I'm really not that interested in Toothless and the Light Furies relationship. I think it's fun. It's really great to see the movie where they kind of tell Toothless and Hiccup as two different characters rather than them being this duo. They're two separate characters that are kind of doing their own thing, which I like about the movie. I just think the Light Fury kind of doesn't. The Light Fury plotline I kind of find myself uninterested in, and honestly, the movie itself I think kind of cuts that plotline short because I feel like Toothless and the Light Fury get captured way too early in the movie, and it kind of makes for the third act kind of being this weird, uninteresting thing. But it's enjoyable enough. It's a fun finale to this franchise, and honestly, with the live action remake coming out this summer, I'm happy to see if they end up going and making all three movies as live action. Because I'm really going to be interested to see if they end up getting to the third one, how they live action remake this one. Because honestly, I don't know how they're going to do it, but who knows? The first live action remake actually looks kind of decent, so we'll see. At number 14, I have Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. This is honestly a really, really good movie. I was not expecting this. The animation is beautiful. The characters are really enjoyable. The story is likable. I don't think there's very few things I dislike about Spirit. One of the few things I do dislike about it is that they have Matt Damon being the narrator for this movie and narrating the thoughts of Spirit, which is just kind of weird. I don't think he belonged in this movie, and honestly, it feels like he was added in post because test audiences didn't understand the character, so he was like, oh, we got to figure out how they get to know this character's emotions, so we hired a celebrity to do it, which is kind of annoying. But that's really the only big problem I have with this movie. I think everything else is phenomenal. It just unfortunately ends up this low on the list because we're starting to enter those DreamWorks movies that either I really adore or I feel like have nothing wrong with them. So honestly, once we get past number 14, we're entering those movies that are like almost flawless, and it's really just a method of personal preference for what I like more. So Spirit, unfortunately, just has that one thing wrong with it, which is why it ends up at number 14, just out of the flawless category of films, I'll say. So, without further ado, let's move into those films, shall we? At number 13, I have Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. This is such a good movie. The stop-motion animation is so good. The characters are enjoyable. The villain is likable. The story is amazing. There is, like I said, very little wrong with this movie, and it just became a method of personal preference, and unfortunately, I've never been the biggest fan of Wallace and Gromit, so it doesn't make it super duper high on my list, but it is still a phenomenal movie, has basically very little wrong with it. If I did have to say anything wrong about it that kind of makes it lower, I think the third act kind of goes on for a little too long, and maybe it could have been cut down for maybe 5-10 minutes, but other than that, this is a flawless movie across the board, and honestly, worth being in the flawless movie category. And it was so worth it to be nominated, and I think it won Best Picture the year it was made. So, good job, Curse the Were-Rabbit. You are a phenomenal movie. Unfortunately, you're not my favorite DreamWorks movie, which is why you unfortunately can't make it any higher. At number 12, I have The First Shrek. Now, this movie is still surprisingly pretty decent. You know, you got the voice cast, which is doing a pretty good job. You've got the story, which is interesting to say the least. The characters are likable. The setting looks really cool. But out of the two really good Shrek movies, I just feel like this one is kind of saying the least out of the two of them. I don't think there's a lot of profound themes in this. And also, I think the ending kind of drags for a little bit because we have to have the boy and the girl split up with the sad song, and then eventually they realize they do love each other, so they come back together. It's not the best movie out there, but it's still a really, really good one, and honestly, I can see why so many people love it, because it really is a pretty decent movie. And unfortunately, like I said with Curse the Were-Rabbit, it's just not my favorite Shrek movie, so it doesn't really make it too much higher, but it is still a really, really good one. At number 11, might be another controversial pick, is Shrek 2. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Shrek 2 is probably better than the top 10 films on my list. I just unfortunately have never been the hugest fan of Shrek. I think there's enjoyable stuff about the franchise. This is a movie where we get introduced to Puss in Boots, who is a lot of fun. The main cast in general of this franchise is a lot better than the main cast of like Madagascar and Trolls. But I think that also, I've never just been the hugest fan of Shrek and the way it kind of does stuff, but I think this movie is the best of the mainline Shrek films, and it's still really, really good as a movie. Fairy Godmother is an amazing villain, probably the best DreamWorks villain out of all of them, in my opinion. There's a lot of good character moments in this movie you get between Shrek, Fiona, Donkey, and Puss in Boots, like I mentioned. There's a lot to really enjoy about Shrek 2. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, it's not my favorite animated movie out there, and these top 13 movies are really just a method of personal preference for what I like. And unfortunately, Shrek 2 doesn't make it very high on my DreamWorks movie I need to rewatch whenever I get the chance list. So I totally understand why so many people rank this as the number one DreamWorks movie. For me personally, it makes number 11, which I don't think is bad, but it's still really, really good. Bringing us into the top 10, I have The Penguins of Madagascar. Now, call me crazy all you want. I really, really enjoy The Penguins of Madagascar. I grew up on the TV series. I loved these characters. Like I mentioned, they're the best part of the mainline Madagascar movies. There's so much to enjoy about that TV series. And this movie just captures the essence of that movie. The spy espionage, all these other small things here and there that go really, really hard. And there's so much love put into this movie. It's so enjoyable. Unfortunately, where it loses some points is I think the North Wind are kind of nothing burgers of characters. I think they're only really there to kind of oppose the Penguins when we can't have Dave do it, which is kind of weird. I think there's certain aspects of the third act which are kind of contrived. In fact, certain aspects of the whole movie are kind of contrived, but it is still a really enjoyable movie. And kind of like I mentioned with some of those other movies, Penguins of Madagascar might be worse than some of the movies I've already talked about. But I can't help but put it high because I just really, really enjoy it.
At number 9, I have Mr. Peabody and Sherman. This movie is a comedic romp. It's so funny. It has some great characters. The story itself is amazing. I love all the different time travel set pieces. And I've mentioned before that I love time travel stories. So this movie was right up my alley and it did not disappoint. This movie is really, really good, and honestly, it's one of the most underrated DreamWorks movies, in my opinion, because I never see anybody talking about this movie, but it totally deserves to be talked about in the same category as some of the other phenomenal DreamWorks films, because it really is that good. If I did have to take off some points somewhere to justify it being lower on the list, I think some parts of the movie kind of go on a little too long, and also the part before we get to the time travel adventure is kind of slow and kind of uninteresting, so if I had to take off points anywhere, it would be right there. But once we get to the time travel stuff, the movie takes off and is one of my favorite DreamWorks movies of all time. And that's why it ends up here at number 9. At number 8, I have Rise of the Guardians. Of all the DreamWorks movies that never got sequels but begged for them, this one I think hurts the most because this is easily the most interesting DreamWorks movie that never got any kind of follow-up. You got some great characters. The holiday figures are really good, and the voice actors are really good in this movie. You got a great story. I love Jack Frost in general. His story is so cool about him not feeling important because nobody sees him, and that comes back at the end. It's really solid storytelling. If I did have to take off points anywhere, it would be the villain. I just don't think Pitch is that interesting of an antagonist. I mean, he serves his role well, which is why this movie is up as high as it is. But unfortunately, aspects of his character don't make a lot of sense. I think some parts of his plan, he kind of takes huge leaps in logic to make it work. And there's certain aspects here and there that I just don't like about him. But there's enough else to enjoy about the movie that Pitch not being the greatest villain of all time doesn't really affect the movie all that much. So this is a great movie. I totally wish that we got more sequels to Rise of the Guardians than sequels to Boss Baby and Trolls. But, I mean, what are we going to do in this point? At number 7, I have The Prince of Egypt. Now, I've already talked about it a couple of times throughout this video, but this movie is probably one of the greatest animated movies of all time. Everything here works on a fundamental level. You got great characters, great casting, great set pieces, great score, great story. Everything comes together to probably make one of the greatest animated movies of all time. And why is it at number 7, you ask? Well, while I'll admit, kind of like I did for Incredibles and Ratatouille in the Pixar video, I think critically, The Prince of Egypt is probably the best DreamWorks movie. I mean, I will die on that hill. But when it comes to personal preference and the DreamWorks movie I enjoy the most and the movie I would rewatch the most, this is just unfortunately not my favorite DreamWorks movie, as I think it's a phenomenal piece of storytelling, and easily, if you've never had the chance to see it, find a way to watch it because it is so worth it. I enjoy other DreamWorks movies more, and that's kind of why Prince of Egypt doesn't make it too high, make it higher on the list. But I will admit, it is probably critically the best DreamWorks movie, and unfortunately, it's just not my personal favorite. At number 6, I have The Wild Robot. This is another movie that I will die on the hill that it's probably one of the best critical DreamWorks films. It's probably right below Prince of Egypt critical-wise. It is so good, from the animation to the storytelling to the characters, the voice acting, the score. Everything about The Wild Robot works. And I mean, I even said technically in my 2024 favorite movie video, this was probably the best critical film I saw last year. It just unfortunately is not my personal favorite movie I've ever seen. I think there's a lot to enjoy about it, and it has something to enjoy for all different ages, which I think also works on a good fundamental storytelling aspect, because, you know, the kids in the audience are going to fall in love with the animals and the story about them, while the adults in the audience are going to fall in love with the motherly aspect of it. So this is a great movie that, honestly, I would totally think came out of Disney if you told me. Like, it looks that good. But, very similar to The Prince of Egypt, it's just not my favorite animated movie from DreamWorks, so it can't really make it into the top 5, which I so desperately wanted it to, but I found that there's 5 other films that I think I enjoy a little more than Wild Robot, so that's why Wild Robot can't make the top 5. But, I will say, like Prince of Egypt, it is probably critically better than the rest of these films, but, and unfortunately, it's just not my personal favorite. At number 5, I have Kung Fu Panda 2. Now, this is how you do a sequel. Everything that works in the first movie is put into the second movie and cranked up to 11. The villain, the characters, the story itself, everything about Kung Fu Panda 2 is so good, and it makes for the movie to be probably better than the first movie if we're talking critical standpoint. I just think, unfortunately, I do prefer the first movie a little bit more. That's why this one kind of is directly below it, but I think Kung Fu Panda 2 is just a really good sequel, and probably should be the gold standard for how you do sequels in animated movies alongside the Toy Story trilogy, because everything that is great about the first movie is brought into the second movie and cranked up to the max to make probably one of the greatest stories that DreamWorks has ever told. And yeah, and it's just enhanced by the fact that it has great characters, great voice cast, a great score, great set pieces. This movie is everything I want out of a top-tier DreamWorks film, and honestly, I could not be more disappointed in the sequel from the Kung Fu Panda trilogy. At number 4, I have the original Kung Fu Panda. This movie is also just another one that I love to watch. Its casting was so good that it allows for the jokes in the movie to land really well. Plus, you pair that with some great set pieces in here. The villain, Tai Lung, is probably one of the greatest DreamWorks villains to ever exist. I mean, he's one of those few villains I think I've ever seen in cinema where watching him, you totally understand where he's coming from and his motivations. It's not one of those villains where you're like, oh, I feel like we could totally solve your issue in like 5 minutes if we had a conversation. No, Tai Lung is just that far gone that it works. And there's the other aspects of the movie. Oogway, I love him in this movie. He's just so good. You got so many other things here and there. This movie is just easily one of the greatest animated movies to ever come out of DreamWorks, but just animation in general, because it portrays such an important message of how you don't need to imitate others to do great things. And that's just so powerful for people. This movie is just amazing, and it honestly is one of my favorite animated movies of all time, and like the listen says, it's one of my favorite DreamWorks movies of all time. At number 3, taking home our bronze medal, is How to Train Your Dragon. Everything I said about Kung Fu Panda applies to this movie. How to Train Your Dragon is one of the few animated movies I've ever seen where if you didn't tell me it was DreamWorks, I could totally convince myself that it came from Pixar or Disney even, because it's that good. I will admit that I also think that as a whole, I also think I probably would say it came from DreamWorks, because it just feels like DreamWorks, and that's what makes it so special. Because I don't honestly think Disney or Pixar could have made a film like this, because everything in this movie is so great. You got the score, the characters, the story. There's so much to enjoy. And even though the villain in this movie doesn't talk, isn't in the movie for most of it, I think that actually works. It's kind of like this superimposing threat that takes up. And honestly, I'm not surprised that of all the movies DreamWorks is deciding to make a live action remake of, this is the one they're starting with because it's easily probably one of their best films, so I'm not surprised. So hopefully that the live action remake can kind of stand in like maybe the like 5 out of 5 category, 5 out of 10 category, because I mean, I hope it's going to be good, but I mean, it's probably never going to be anywhere near this film because this film is just a masterpiece that I don't think any studio is probably going to be able to top. Unfortunately, like I said, there's still 2 films that I enjoy a little bit more, so let's get into them. At number 2, taking home our silver medal, is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. This movie came out of nowhere and surprised everyone. They are making a sequel to a mediocre spin-off from a franchise that was already on the decline. And this movie is amazing. It's better than the first 2 Shrek films for me because this film is so good. It has Spider-Verse-like animation that makes the movie look visually stunning. The characters are all enjoyable. The story is so good because it's one of the few times in movies where they took a realistic concept and made it work in a film, which is so refreshing when we keep getting so many films that's like, oh yeah, our main character is now depressed because he's old. And this movie is great. And the other thing I love about this movie is that for years now, we have been begging DreamWorks, Pixar, Disney to have real villains in their movie again. And Puss in Boots: The Last Wish look at those complaints and said, well, why don't we put 3 great villains in the same movie? And it's so good because all of them work. Because you got Goldilocks, who is our redeemable villain. You got Jack Horner, who is the unredeemable villain. And then you got Death, who is the antagonist. Even though Death is not in the movie, is only in the movie for like 5 minutes. He has like 5 minutes of screen time. He is such a presence that every time he shows up, it feels earned by the movie. And honestly, it makes the movie just that much better. But yeah, Puss in Boots, I will admit, is a really good movie. There is just one DreamWorks movie, though, that I like a little bit more. I'm not going to lie to you guys. There really was no other contender for first place. I've said before that other DreamWorks movies are probably better than this one critically. Prince of Egypt, Wild Rabbit, heck, even Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is probably better than this movie. And even if any of the other DreamWorks movies that I had never seen prior to making this video, even if I enjoyed liking them, there was no way it was ever going to beat this movie. So without further ado, my number 1 favorite DreamWorks movie is Megamind. This movie was one I never checked out when it first came out. When I remember I was at a summer camp and they were trying to pick a movie for movie night, and we found this movie and the kids wanted to put it on, so I didn't fight them on it. And going in, I was expecting it just to be a bland generic superhero movie, but then the movie uses its superhero angle to tell a really profound story about this villain who doesn't want to be a villain anymore. You've got great characters. The voice cast is all doing phenomenal. Like I said before, I'm usually opposed to having tons of overpaid celebrities voicing characters, but every character in this movie, every voice actor in this movie doesn't feel like they're a voice actor. It feels like they're just the characters. Jonah Hill, Tina Fey, Will Ferrell, David Cross, they all embody their characters so well to the point where when I was watching, it wasn't like I was picking out celebrities. It was like I'm watching characters and the voices are just happen to be coming from celebrities. So that's great. The movie is hilarious. There are so many jokes in this movie that I laugh on repeat viewings. It's so great. And I think this is the only DreamWorks movie that has that for me. Megamind is one of those few DreamWorks movies that I think I would put on the same level as some of the greatest animated movies to ever come out of any animation studio ever. Megamind is just so good, and it takes the number 1 spot for my favorite DreamWorks movie. So there you guys have it, my ranking of all 50 currently released DreamWorks movies. If you guys want to take on the challenge yourself and rank all 50 DreamWorks movies, drop your rankings down in the comment section. And if that's a little too difficult for you, just give me your top 5 and your bottom 5. But without further ado, thank you guys all very much for watching this video. And if you want to see more, make sure to like and subscribe. But until next time, hope you guys have a great day. And hope to see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.